This conversation originally premiered at CFF on March 30th, 2022. Behind all those hair-raising, heart-stopping moments, you actually will find a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and lessons. The following conversation is a spotlight on some of Canada's premier indie talent who came up in thriller and horrors. These three cover it all, from script development, production to post, and they share their tales from the trenches and beyond. Cheers, Cheryl Meyer, Gavin Micheal Booth, and Navin Ramaswaran. Welcome to the fest.
All right, guys, how's it going?
Goes
Good.
well, sir. How are you?
I'm good. When I heard about this panel and then found out that you guys were on it with me, I thought, wow, this is pretty amazing. And actually, I don't think Jen knew that I edited The Last Mark with you, Cheryl.
Oh.
Yeah, so it was kind of a little bit of a surprise for her too. So I guess they didn't really plan for all of us to know each other, but hey, we got a long history. All three of us, especially Gavin and I, we go way back to.
I'm only 31, so I haven't known you that long.
Yeah.
Can't go that far back.
No, I'm kidding.
Not that far back. But yeah, I mean, we've all been working in the industry for a while now, dealing with various genres, especially including the thriller horror genre. It's interesting to me that genre. The term genre, is a type of movie. It could mean anything from action, drama, comedy, including horror. But in its sort of most basic or most pure form, a genre movie is really a very good example or a very pure example of that genre. So that movie sort of contains all those the right elements that make it a genre movie, right? And I think horror, especially independent horror, really falls into that category, which is why a lot of people, when they say genre picture or genre movie, usually relates to or refers to the horror genre. What do you guys think of that? Like, especially the horror genre in Canada?
Well,
Cheryl, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. It is a good point because whenever you're talking about genre film, you're kind of like, well, which one in the genre scape? There's thriller and horror, and then where do you draw the line to what's horror? Is running for your life horror enough, or there has to be gore? It's like the levels of where do you draw the line? So I think maybe that's why thriller and suspense kind of fold into it, because it's all like a level of heart pounding action. And then it can go all the way to supernatural. But I think it's interesting that you can have a horror film and then like a psychological thriller in the same designation.
And let's not forget sci-fi as well. A lot of sci-fi films are genre, and there's a lot of that horror, action, thriller crossover with sci-fi films. Even a short film that I have right now, it's technically a comedy, but it keeps getting into genre festivals because it has this sci-fi element to it, which I didn't expect to happen. The idea of genre film is like the widest range of films, like you just said, like the thrillers and the you can go from Saw to The Shining, and it's all considered genre filmmaking, and just from the most cerebral kind of horror film to the all-out bloodbath and final girl slasher film.
And the cool thing about it too, I'm sure you guys have experienced this too, there's a very, very inbuilt fan base for genre movies, right? Like people, including I'm one of them. I love horror movies. I grew up watching horror movies.
Yeah.
I have such a love for them. Do you guys feel that way too? And if so, why do you think that sort of passion and relationship occurs specifically with the horror genre?
Horror fans are it's like having the same audience that like a rock band has without having to subscribe to a specific band. There are just horror fans that will watch any and all horror movies and bond with each other over them. And they're generally like some of the most fun audiences at festivals. A lot of Comic-Cons will have a separate like horror section of their convention, and they're everywhere. They're all over the world, and they're so I don't even know what it is about horror fans, but I think they just all love the genre so much they want to see it do well, that they seem to be the best and most willing to promote indie films and help the films get out there and want to spread the word about what's out there versus drama or more traditional films. So in my experience of interacting with horror fans, making horror projects, you feel loved. You feel like a rock star because these people just are excited to watch anything new in the genre that they haven't seen yet.
And what's kind of cool about that too is I feel like we all feel, because especially independent genre movies, we feel like we discovered it, and you have that urge to share it with other people, and then when you do that, you realize, oh, there's all these, it's still sort of like a niche market, you can call it, but it's a big one. It's a big niche, if that makes sense. But I feel like that is part of it too, because that sort of excitement of sharing your discovery and then realizing, oh, so many other people have discovered it as well, and that's that connection, and you build friendships and all that kind of stuff at places like film festivals like CFF and after parties and so on and so forth, right? That connection. And then, what do you think about that, Cheryl? Like, what was your experience like in the genre of filmmaking?
I wanted to speak to the audience part of it, because being somebody who loves horror movies or genre movies, literally will seek it out. Any recommendation anyone gives me all the time. I don't care where it's from, if it's got subtitles, I will watch anything. And even when it's really bad, like, it's still good. Like, you just want to see anything in the genre element. And I think it's because it gives us a thrill, and it's like going on a roller coaster. Like, if you like that kind of stuff, then you're seeking it out. It's a type of person who enjoys that. And then on the other side of it, I also think it's an internationally accepted type of feeling versus like comedy and drama. All those things could be political or have like a very specific take that only like culturally might only resonate with certain markets. But internationally, I think scary is scary. So that's sort of what I have found. Yeah.
Well, what I've also found is that there's no discrimination against the age of a film either. A genre film I made 8 or 9 years ago will still end up on like Halloween, like 10 best indie horror films you might not have heard of. And it's not this, it's got to be the new shiny thing that's out this year, and that's the only thing we're talking about. We constantly see, and I find that horror fans tend to follow the casts and the directors and what they go on to do next more intensely than other genres, which is great, because it just keeps it's great that you can be part of like growing the fan base for all of the creatives involved in making the film.
Absolutely. When Sam Raimi first directed the first Spider-Man, I was like, oh, great. I've loved Sam Raimi since his Evil Dead days. And now he's doing this huge Hollywood movie, and I'm there to support him, even though he has no idea who I am. And you know what I mean? You don't have that personal relationship, but I feel like I know Sam Raimi as sort of my buddy, because we grew up making horror movies as well. You know what I mean? And it's cool. It's nice to see the success and kind of follow them as well. So Gavin, you made Scarehouse. How long ago is that now?
It was released around October 2014, so it's coming. It's eight years now, and so coming up on a 10th anniversary, which feels weird.
Yeah, I remember watching that movie. Was it at CFF?
No, we just booked the Royal for our kind of part of our theatrical release. Yeah.
Gotcha. I know it was at the Royal. I think that's why I'm mixing it up with CFF. But I mean, Skyhouse did really well, and it's still continuing to do really well. What was your sort of experience, from the inception part of the project? Like it's a smaller indie movie, but you did have some sort of backing behind it as well.
Yeah, right? we had so the movie in a nutshell is a revenge film set inside of a man-made funhouse, like your typical kind of Halloween haunted house. And the genesis of it was my best friend Sean Lippert owns the Scare House Windsor, which is where I was living at the time, where I was born and raised. And I was just walking around in there being like, you could shoot a movie in here. And I was, just learning how I've helped him build rooms and run things there lightly and helped out as a good friend. But this idea just hit, and I was like, okay, this is the next. I'm always looking for the next cheap indie movie I can make, because there's not always money available to indie filmmakers. So I like to have something in my back pocket that can be made for the fraction of a normal budget. But I just happened to be coming off another project with Telefilm that didn't go through. It was a movie that dealt with the school shooting, and it just got too political, and eventually some of the funding came up. But they sort of said, well, whatever you make next, we're in. And we brought them the Scare House, which is not their typical wheelhouse of doing gory horror movies, but we already had the relationship, and we only needed a small amount of money to do it. And we had a Canadian distributor, and we had Universal Studios backing us in the United States before we went into production. So we made this tiny little Canadian horror movie that got to be released on the world stage by one of the big boys. So it was kind of a wild ride, and it just keeps finding new homes. One of the interesting things is that all these new new streaming platforms keep popping up. Like Tubi wasn't a thing where films could make money 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. And, then there's a movie and a something else and a something else, and we can't keep up. But it's interesting is you can get your films on there. You can keep finding new sources of revenue and new audiences for them. So, we didn't really do a big festival run. It played at a couple festivals, but we already had our theatrical release. It did some theatrical overseas. It did great on VOD in America and Canada, and it kind of just keeps going. It's been an interesting one. I wouldn't think it would have the life it has, but it didn't hurt that 3 of the leads on it have gone on to have amazing careers in television and film. So people keep finding the film through being fans of them and another work as well.
And that's really interesting about distribution and getting the movie out there, right? At one point, it was sort of a huge dark cloud with sort of streaming platforms versus movie theaters, and it's impossible to get a small movie in movie theaters. But then slowly, once things started to sort of normalize, I guess you could call it, and streaming became more accepted. I feel like now we're living in another golden age of movies, really, with all the streaming platforms and opportunities. I mean, there are movies that you wouldn't potentially be able to get funded years ago that now you can, because people want to watch different stuff, things that are not in typical big Hollywood movies, right? Not that I'm a fan of big Hollywood movies too, but I feel like a variety is good. Giving people having the choice to watch that or something smaller like Scarehouse is a good thing. I think now things have normalized a little bit, and I think that's great. So Cheryl, you write a lot of material. Like you write for TV, you write movies. How did that did you start in the horror in sort of like genre platform, or did you sort of get into it? I know you are a horror fan, but in terms of your professional writing, did you always start there, or did you sort of get into it?
No, I started in comedy, which is,
right.
I was thinking about this because I first started writing, I wrote comedy. I loved comedy. And then at some point it shifted, and I just kind of, all of my care went into genre and much darker content. I mean, my comedy had like a dark sense of humor, and I was trying to figure out why that happened, because it was a gradual thing. And now I don't have a ton of like desire to be writing comedy, even though I think Last Mark has like a sense of humor to it. And it's because of just the world, like my personal feelings of what I felt. Like I was like, I don't know if there's a lot to laugh about right now. So that's what happened. And it actually, like, I thought about it to figure out when, there was like a big turning point. And we'll just leave it at that in the world, where I was like, okay, I don't know if I'm laughing anymore. So yes. And so that would have been like 2017-ish that I started. Everything was now dark, horror, thriller. Yeah. It
kind of makes sense that you started off in comedy to me, because especially when it comes to timing and pacing, comedy and horror have a lot of similarities, right?
They do.
It's the setup, the punchline, and you don't overstay a welcome. Like a good horror movie is nice and lean and gets to the point quickly, and it has a good rhythm to it. It's very much like comedy. Speaking of The Last Mark, which is playing at CFF this year, it's would you call that a genre movie? It's more of a thriller.
It's a thriller, yeah.
Right? It's a dramatic thriller. What is that, writing that movie and sort of seeing it through, because you are one of the producers on it as well, so it's essentially a baby. Talk to us a little bit about that entire process, starting from the inception of it to post,
Yeah, I'm a co-producer on it as well. The inception was working with one of the producers, Bruno Marino, I was working on one of his movies, and we just had this kind of desire to make a festival thriller. So something you could make for a budget in Canada, but also had that sort of hitman fun element to it. And I mean, and that's a challenge. It's a very interesting challenge, because you're like, I need to have some action and get people excited, but then have them stay around and sit down with us when we get to the place where we cannot afford any more action. Now it's like, now we're going to have 2 people in a house kind of like mentally battling out the ending of what's going to happen. So keeping the mystery going and all that. So from the beginning, I was working with a producer, and then I brought, I knew Jordan Barker. I'd worked with him as well, and he was excellent. And originally he was attached in a creative sense, and we worked for a while with that team. But we, at some point, were thinking about getting a female director. And then I met Reem in a writer's room. Right. And she just had such an interesting point of view, and her personal history was very interesting. I thought that she could bring something unique to the project. So we got her on board, and then we went through the process of getting funding. We had NOHFC sort of earlier on, and then Ontario Creates came in and really they were the unlocking of going to camera. And then in post, Navin was involved. Like, you saw the project kind of earlier on, and you were just wonderful to have on the project because he was cutting as we were shooting. And I mean, you gotta do that if you can.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's a benefit for sure, because you're moving at such a fast pace, and if you can afford to have an editor cutting as you go. I mean, obviously you're not going to be cutting one day to one day. It's going to be a little slower in the edit, but at least you get an assembly and an idea of how each scene is feeling and pacing, and if something's missing. I mean, one of the best sort of luxuries that I had when I made one of my earlier films that also played at CFF, Chasing Valentine, was I cut the movie myself. I directed it, I cut it myself. But then as I was cutting it, I noticed, I should have got this shot or that shot or whatever. But I would just grab a camera and go and shoot it. That's how, like, Gavin and I, that's how we work. We'll just literally grab a camera and go out and shoot it. If we need inserts or whatever, and I'll call my actor, like, hey, are you free on Saturday? Stuff like that. But you can't always do that, especially on a larger scale project like this. So the next best thing would be doing exactly what you did. Bring an editor on to kind of help you sort of see the movie as you go, right? Which benefited us for sure. Yeah, and going through sort of, we're all Canadian filmmakers. We make a lot of stuff in Canada, obviously. Let's talk a little bit about the funding and the system in Canada over here. It's great that we have a lot of government bodies that help us make our movies. Along with that, do you think there are, what are the pros and cons of a system like that, in your opinion? Let's start with Gavin this time.
Oh boy, I have to be good now. I generally not a fan. I like that there's money available, but I think there's a limited scope in the types of films that they will accept. Genre and horror are often incredibly overlooked, even though in terms of their mandates of creating Canadian content that can play on the global stage, it often makes the most sense that these films will find an audience. Because one of the best things about genre films is you don't have to have stars all the time. They're not star driven, it's concept driven. But that being said, I had Telefilm on Scarehouse, and that movie wouldn't have been made I would have found a way to make it, but the version of the movie we made wouldn't have been made without them. And one of the greatest things is the tax credit system, which is there's no discrimination there. It's just if you make a movie and properly file for your tax credits, you get the money back. I haven't worked with the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund yet. I have something in development there, but I mean, what an amazing opportunity to have up to $500,000 injected into your film. Like, tell me where else you're going to make that happen. It's really great. What it requires though is patience. And I think it's one of those things I wish I could go back to 22-year-old me and you, because we're working together on a film, and be like, learn the business side of things now, understand the financing structures, start applying for every grant you can now, get in the system, get familiar with it, start making those relationships, because it can make your film career a lot easier than like, I've got $25,000 in a dream. Like Navin and I made a feature for $500. We broke our backs trying to make that movie and make it happen at that price point. And if we just sort of had the patience or taken on a mentor earlier in our careers to say, this is the way, look at all this money that's available to you. You just have to have the patience, because those applications are grueling, and I just, my biggest advice on the funding is to filmmakers out there. If you are a creative filmmaker and you don't have, the part of your brain for business and marketing, all that, find a producer, build that relationship to work with. You don't have to carry that weight and do the burden. Because I think it's scary for a lot of filmmakers. You go, oh, Telefilm, you have your first meeting, or you open that application, or even Ontario Creates, and you're like, this is like homework. I specifically went into filmmaking, so I don't have to do any more homework. So it's a daunting task, but it can be incredibly rewarding, and it's essentially free money. Like, you should be taking advantage of it if your project is applicable for what's out there. We live in an amazing country that does back the arts, but genre is mostly overlooked. And I hope that continues to change. I hope eventually there's a way to say these are important stories. Canada has made, how many Canadian films have been sold to Shudder in the US in the last year or two alone? Shudder's the biggest force on earth for streaming for genre films. And there's just like anything for Jackson and Slacks and all these movies that are coming out of Canada. Mm-hmm. It's important. And Canada's a big voice in that.
Absolutely. Those are all great points, man. And I feel exactly the same. I wish 20 years ago we had learned the Telefilm process. So just the funding application process and how it works, because it's a whole different thing. Our mentality was, let's just pick up a camera, go and shoot because we can.
Yeah.
We know actors, we know DPs, let's just do it. Even if we couldn't afford a DP, we'd shoot it ourselves, we'd light it ourselves. But that was the mentality, and that was great. There's a different sort of energy to it, and that's awesome. And I think everyone should do that. That's the best film school you can ever ask for, right? You can ever go through. But there is the business side of it. It is a filmmaking business, and you need to be not only aware, but just really good at maneuvering that business. And whether it's doing it yourself, which I personally don't recommend because my brain doesn't think that way, but really, really having that connections with a good producer who can do that. And many of them, Jordan's one of them, Bruno's one of them. I'm working with someone right now, Jeff Bolton, who I think you know too, Gavin. He's great.
Yeah, very well. Yeah.
Him and I just put in a Telefilm application for a project that we're doing, and just looking at he's just so diligent and he knows his stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, I'd be drowning in this. There's no way I would be able to handle this.
And enjoys it, and enjoys it.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
So it's getting, sort of collaborating with people like that. The movie business is all about collaboration, right? And this is just one of those collaborations that you just have to learn that people, by people, I mean filmmakers like us who are very guerrilla style or come from that background, we don't necessarily always think about that. So people should. I'll add very quickly too that the other reason that it's so important is you offset the recoupment budget that you need to bring back in. So the whole weight isn't on a private investor or a film studio or a production company to bear the weight of that budget. If 30% or 40% or sometimes up to 70 and 80% is through this, through the grant system, through the tax credit system and funds like Northern Ontario Heritage, it's a smarter business model because not all of the weight is on the producers to recoup that budget. Because you'll never meet anybody, even strangers who don't even know how movies are made, that don't know that filmmaking is a risky business and one of the riskiest ones out there. So it's important also learn that system so that you will have an easier time finding the private money that you need for a project if you're offsetting it with all of these other like wonderful programs that are offered. Absolutely. So Cheryl, along those lines, what is the biggest sort of learning experience that you took away from one of your recent projects? It could be The Last Mark, it could be something else, but it was like a real learning experience that maybe you either weren't aware of or just didn't realize, and if you could go back in time, you would change that thing.
Oh wow. It's such it's a challenging question because it's almost like there's a million little things, like rather than it being like one giant thing, because every time you get on a project you kind of learn something new. In TV, like TV and film, independent film and television are very different beasts. And like when you get into the TV world, it's super fast. And on top of that, like the speed in which you got to turn around stuff is it's efficient. And then in the independent world of film, it's like you do that too, but it's not until you get that sort of green light. And when you hit like pre-production, then you start running. But up to that, there's a lot of waiting. There's a lot of opportunity to kind of play with the script, work with the creatives, trying to iron out what you're going to do. But then the difference is the budget challenge, I think. So like TV, you kind of, you have to have a certain quality, the money's there, all the union, everything's going to go through that process. And then in film, it's like, it could be, to your point, $500. Like, or, you know, our budget was between like 1.5-ish, and it's healthy. It sounds healthy. It's definitely when you know you can do it for like $500, or you can do it for, but still there's a lot of challenges in that. There's always like fighting again. And then we went in during COVID. I think that was a learning experience for everyone. Even so, Jordan and Maddie Fowl and Borga Dorder, who were also on The Last Markets producers, I think we were one of the first that got to go to camera when the government had given us backing for the insurance. Like there was this big gap of everyone being like, oh, are we going to get insured? And then we got told yes, and we went right away. So I think it was a huge learning process for everyone about, you know, how do you stay safe and meet all the requirements of the insurance company too. And we did it. Nobody got sick on set. But like, what an added fear and what an added like stressor every single day.
I know, as if we didn't have enough stress going into production on anything. Like you add this whole other thing with this pandemic and all the rules, and you know, no one wanted to be that set who got shut down because someone got sick, right? No one wanted to be that. And luckily, thankfully, you know, it seemed like the industry did really well because we got through it, or we're still going through it, you know, but it was also a learning experience, right? Creating new positions like COVID coordinators on set and stuff like that. That adds to the budget too, and time, because you're checking everyone and signing people in and all that stuff, you know.
And working in a mask and a shield, like on a set where you're trying to like whisper some like information to someone, like no one can hear you. It was just, you were trying to like
barrier, right?
You're trying to be like, how can I be loud and quiet and like project through these
and
multiple layers of
whispering at 6 feet is difficult. Yes,
It was interesting.
Yep. COVID. Oh man. Yes. Any COVID production stories you have to share, Gavin?
I had my film Last Call was coming out, so I was busy promoting that when the pandemic like really hits. And I've mostly just been writing and prepping sort of the next. I have money in the bank for a feature that I'm just like, it's a small budget, so we just can't have a shutdown. So I've just been kind of like, and I keep thinking, and you keep seeing like, oh, in 3 months we'll be out of this, and another 3 months we'll be out of this. So we've been building bubble scenarios. But I, you know, I did shoot one. I was in Los Angeles when the pandemic hits, living there, and I did shoot one like 22-minute short film. But we did it with just the most reduced crew ever, which I felt very fortunate about, where I was like, this is my wheelhouse. I've been a one-man team to make all these movies. I got the energy to do this again. And I wrote a feature that we were going to shoot during the pandemic. Some other life things came up for Sarah, my wife, who acts in a lot of my films, where it just didn't happen. But I was game to go find a way to adapt and make something small and you know, with social distancing in mind. But I've only done a couple commercial projects during COVID. But you know, I find I respect our industry, and watching my wife do so much TV work last year, like, you know, it's annoying, but nobody ever really complained about it. Everybody was like, if we get to do what we love, we're all going to just do our best, do the things that we have to do. And honestly, I never felt safer than living with an actress who was working during COVID, because when she's getting tested multiple times a week, sometimes daily, I'm like, if she doesn't have it and I'm working from home, I'm pretty good. I don't have COVID yet.
Good. And Gavin, you have worked on both sides of the border. You've worked here, you've made films in Canada, you've made films in the US as well. You know, what sort of differences do you notice, especially in genre filmmaking, like in terms of, you know, getting a movie made, whether it's funding, but also sort of like the energy, and how do you see much of a difference? Is it very similar?
It's not based. I mean, a lot of people access tax credits in various states and regions that they're shooting. Canada, it's a double-edged sword with the funding, where sometimes if you don't get the funding, you don't get to make your movie. There's not an alternative, because the system everybody's just been so ingrained in using the system. Whereas America is much more entrepreneurial, where like, that didn't work, we'll go get the money somewhere else. We'll go here. It's just, you know, the industry is so much larger there. So there's just more opportunity just by the, you know, the size of the industry. industry, but also just the access to all of the horror companies. Like, we did the world's first live movie that we did with Blumhouse, and it was a genre film. And that was I have an idea in the morning, and by noon I was on the phone with Blumhouse, and the next day I was in the room, and they were just like, I find for good creative ideas that are outside of the box and genre, there's somebody that's going to snap it up immediately and run with it versus the never-ending waiting of 6 months and committees that have to decide everything. Not to say that the studio system doesn't have all those committees and everything too, but I just found there's much more. And listen, Toronto's great for it. We're all independent filmmakers from Toronto. You can always find people that will just come help you on your passion project. Living in LA and being in America, there's that tenfold or 100-fold where everybody just wants to get out there and make things. And, it's called the land of opportunity for a reason. I just found more opportunity. But at the same time, I love shooting in Canada. And I think it's also, I shoot most of my films in Windsor where I grew up. And it's still like, there's those regional bonuses, that hometown thing that you can't replicate in other more expensive cities. So I've really loved having the access and the ability to work on both sides of the border. Because I know if a project won't work in Canada, I can take it somewhere else. It's not the end of the line for that particular project.
Right. That's really great insight. When it comes down to it, at the end of the day, no matter where you make your film, like you guys mentioned, horror, especially the genre, it's very universal, right? It's very universal and has sort of collective mindset. Coming down to the basics, the script, screenplay, the story. In your opinions, what makes a good genre film in terms of the foundation of it? Maybe we'll start with you, Cheryl, because you're both writers and you can definitely speak to that.
I think one is you really want the audience to care about the character, and that will keep them going through. Like, if some of the other elements are lacking, but they care about the character, they'll stick through it to get to those good parts. Or it's the other way where you're just watching for the really great scares and you're kind of like, I really don't care what happens to these people, but I am so into just the supernatural element. I've never seen anything like this. Also, a unique way in delivering a horror genre film. If there's something you haven't seen before, there's a few, there's a couple that have come out recently that just did something different. And you were like, oh, this is really neat. I haven't seen I wish I remember what it was called. But anyway, it followed them through the whole town, and you were kind of traveling across the city with the camera, and it was just something new and different. And so that can get you into it too. But so it's either the character, the scares are really great, or just a unique way to doing it. Oh, Color Out of Space recently for me. Yep. What, right? You were like, wow, what?
Yeah.
This is cool. You know what I mean? I haven't seen this before. And if you have all three of those things, oh yes, what a wonderful movie for everyone.
Just knock it out of the park. Yeah, that's the goal. That's the hope, right? That's what you are set out for. What about yourself, Gavin?
Yes, it's some originality, points for originality all the time, but to parrot everything that Cheryl said, the characters. If you don't like the characters, you can still, you're right. You don't ever want to walk out of a horror movie and be like, well, at least the gore effects were good. You want to care about the people and what they're going through. I don't know. Everyone's take on it. The brand new Texas Chainsaw Massacre that came out. Yeah. Sort of terrible vanilla characters, and then some great gore and cinematography. And I was at the end of it, you're like, I don't remember any of these characters' names. I don't care what happened. But I like the genre bending stuff. Chris Langdon, who's been doing Happy Death Day and Freaky, just taking that mashup of let's do two things we haven't seen together. Or my friend Jed Shepard and his team that made Hosts during the pandemic, that was all done over Zoom, and they right in that zeitgeist of we're all living through this, and they got it out so fast that it felt. And it's a found footage movie, so it felt so much more real that we were living through this at the time. And I'm a huge fan of found footage, things like Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity that just completely shock the system and can do something where anything that feels real and grounded. But that's where most of my scripts start. I want to be able to believe that this is something that could happen somewhere. It's not. I do less supernatural stuff. and more. Even I have a vampire film that we're about to shoot. It's very, very grounded versus anything fantastical. That's where I think most of my stuff starts with is character and story, and just living in a world that's believable.
Yeah, that's absolutely. And timing is a big thing too, right? Because it takes so long to make a movie. By the time it comes out, the cycle, I mean, and horror is sort of cyclical. It keeps coming back, right? If you miss that cycle, you're kind of out of the game basically. And then the distributors have a stack of movies that are all sort of off that subgenre and they don't want it anymore. And then you wait for the next cycle. But with something like The Host, it was great. They got it out so fast. It was totally relevant. Watching it, you're going through that, watching it, and the timing there was perfect. And then I mean, there's something to be said about movies like the new Texas Chainsaw, which is a good example of something that they're not trying to do anything different here. They're just giving the people your basic great gore effects, and I was entertained by that movie. I thought it was fun. I had fun watching it. Same like
I also very much enjoyed it. I was
listen,
but sometimes you need that, right?
I will go on record saying it is not the worst Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequel by a long shot. So,
Yeah. Speaking of, sort of grounded in reality is another great point as well. But at the same time, the opposite of that, sort of making it hyper real, is also something interesting, where you kind of suck your audience into this sort of dreamscape, right? For that 90 minutes or whatever. I like and I'm a big fan of David Cronenberg, but I also like Brandon Cronenberg's work. Possessor was one movie that really stuck with me for a while after watching it. It's such a great style and tone that he had that's very haunting and nightmarish. I'm not sure if you guys have watched it, but it's wonderful.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah. And
I think when you say that, the hyper stylized, I just saw Titan recently, and movies like that.
I do want to watch that. I haven't watched that one yet.
That's just that movie's just on another planet, but it feels grounded, but it's also so hyper stylized and beautiful.
Just like we were talking about before, I've been following that director because she made Raw before, and I really liked.
I love Raw.
And Titan is the follow-up movie, which I'm yet to watch, but I'm looking forward to it.
For me, it's movies like It Follows and things that just come out. And we're like, oh man, never seen anything like this, and just in style and the choice of the score and the always like just when the story and the team behind the camera's always following somebody. It's all these long, slow, everything about the movie is where the style of the shooting matches the story being told is when they hook me immediately.
Another one that is sort of, it has all those elements, but it's a different type of movie. Another Canadian movie by 3 Quebecois filmmakers, actually, Summer of '84. Have you watched? Have either of you watched that? I love that movie so much. It's great. It's like it's if John Hughes or Spielberg made like a horror movie. I know Spielberg has, but it's like it's very, very much bathed in the 80s nostalgia, but they do such a good job with the score, with the look, with the style, and the performances. It's just amazing.
I didn't even know that was a Canadian film until today.
Yeah, it's by 3 directors. The 3 of them directed it. They made Turbo Kid previously.
Oh yeah.
Good, really good stuff. Summer of '84. I even have that record on vinyl. Also by La Matos, which is a Canadian band. Anyways, all right. Well, guys, it was so awesome chatting with the both of you. How about we wrap it up with some favorite genre movies from Canada that you guys like? Movies, filmmakers, someone to look out for. Any records for viewers out there who might want to be checking out some new stuff?
I mean, I still love your film Nara because it's so bonkers. It's just one of those movies that has there's nothing like that out there.
I kind of want to remake it with a budget,
I had a lot of fun with Vicious Fun recently, watching Shudder.
Vicious Fun. Yes. We can't talk about genre making without mentioning the Black Fawn guys.
Black Fawn, Bite. They've just always had some of the best gore and then just knowing how fiercely independent they were, and at one point they're just cranking them out, but sort of representing horror and genre in a big way. For Sake of Vicious, Gabe Carrera's film, I really enjoyed. Those are the Canadian ones that come to mind of recent times.
Yeah, lots of good stuff and came out in the last few years for sure. Any movies come to your mind, Cheryl, that you would like us to check out?
I really enjoyed Violation. remember the filmmaker, and I'm so sorry. It was in TIFF 2020.
Okay.
I'm like, what year is it now? Oh, this pandemic. Because it was a female POV on genre, and it had this sort of like specific take on why, like the main character's motivation was interesting to see. And they went for it in terms of gore. And I'm not even like, I don't love gore, but I was like, impressed. Like I was like, the prosthetics in this thing are insane.
Wow. I gotta check it out.
And I liked it a lot. And I thought the cinematography was excellent. I haven't seen anything for Jackson, but I want to see anything for Jackson. It's one of those ones that I keep hearing about.
Super fun.
Yeah. And of course, like the older ones like Cube and
Cube. Cube is such a great example. Yeah.
Great example. Yeah. It's a classic. I want to read
I mean, that's the thing. Like Canada is also responsible for like beginning the slasher genre and being an early part of it with like Black Christmas. Like we're home to one of the most, we're home to a couple of the most iconic horror films
Ginger
ever made.
Snaps.
Ginger Snaps
was also a really great female POV of a horror, like wrapping it around,
very ahead of its time, because was that like 90s? What year was that? 97, 98?
Mid 90s, I think. Yeah.
Mid 90s. So like, very ahead of its time, and it holds up really well.
Exactly. And it does. I actually did watch Ginger Snaps recently again, and it does hold up. It's great. It's wonderful.
Oh, but we also
I love Catherine Isabel is just, she's excellent.
Is it Jason?
Great American Mary as well, another Canadian movie.
Yeah. Jason Eisner that did, Hobo with a Shotgun and worked on the VHS movies. Like we have tons of genre talent in Canada. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, good stuff. On that note, guys, thanks for chatting. It was awesome catching up with the both of you, and hope to see you at TFF events this year.
I will be there. I'm thrilled to be part of it. Happy to be part of this panel. Navin, we don't chat enough as being dear friends. Cheryl, nice to meet you. I know some of your work. I've seen some of the shorts you've been involved in. I'm going to see this movie because I know Navin and Bruno, and now you. Definitely looking forward to checking it out.
That's right. Actually, we should plug our movie. So Cheryl and I have The Last Mark playing at TFF. Gavin, what's your movie again? This one that's playing?
I have this weird genre bending comedy called Rent Due, which is a short film. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Due spelled D-O, as in we must do rent. Yeah.
Okay.
It's about three useless roommates that can't ever pay their rent, and on the last day of every month they get involved in some insane hijinks to pay the rent. Yeah.
Awesome. Nice. I'll really look forward to it. Awesome, guys. All right.
Yeah, it was so wonderful speaking with you. Thank you.
Yeah. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Cheryl, Gavin, and Navin for raising the stakes for us all today. This chat was produced by Jen Pogue, Ashley Rains, and Bern Euler for the Canadian Film Fest. Music by Brett Higgins. The Cheers and Chats podcast is co-produced, edited, and sound mixed by Ryan Gordon. For more info on the fun happening now at CFF, find us at CanadianFilmFest.ca.